So moving from trends in the gaming industry, this panel is on monetization regulation, and we're very happy to have with us Andrea Rizzi, partner with Osborne Clarke, and head of the firm's digital sector in Italy. Yeah? So we will start with Andrea, and then we have with us Tamara Sakolczyk, Senior Legal Counsel at Wargaming, that will take us into cryptocurrencies. And we will start with Andrea setting the scene, addressing the legal challenges and risk, and then Tamara will take the floor. So, Andrea, please.
Yeah, hello, hi everybody. I'm glad to see that there are some survivors from last night. That's a good thing, I'm impressed. So just to add to what Maria said, I've been back in private practice for about a year, and prior to that I worked for almost a decade for two US-based AAA publisher as an in-house lawyer. So, excuse me. This is going to be a sort of a general introduction, setting the scene for the top specific presentation that Tamara from Wargaming will give on cryptocurrencies, and for the panel later on, which will discuss loot boxes. I've been asked to try and link the monetization regulation topic to the theme of this year's conference, which is, of course, about culture, identities, freedom, and artificial intelligence. And so this is what I'm going to do. And the fundamental question that my presentation is about is what does the evolution of the monetization models and the regulations applicable to those regulation models tell us, if anything, about the state of the industry, which, put another way, how are the emerging patterns of monetization influencing the video game industry, culture, identity, and freedoms? And is the culture, identity, and freedoms of the industry influencing the monetization models, or is it the other way around? Which is, I understand, I appreciate a big question. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Of course, we're all aware of two emerging trends. The market for physical products is shrinking, so digital revenues play a big role, and free-to-play is driving most of the revenues in that space. So we've just entered the era, the game as a service era, apparently. Have we not? Well, actually, money started to become significant in games with coin-operated arcade machines during the course of the 70s. A gamer would push a coin through the slot and would be able to play for a certain number of lives or for a certain number of time. So that's effectively a pay as you play type of service, and given the small amount of money involved in the transaction from the consumer side or the user side, I would regard that transaction as a microtransaction. In the beginning, during those years, the legal issues that a video game lawyer would have to face was essentially protection of intellectual property rights, while on the other hand, avoiding infringing others' intellectual property rights. In some countries, including Italy, there was some sort of light touch regulation applicable to the operation of those arcade machines in public places, essentially requiring a notification to certain authorities to enable them to gain visibility into who was operating those arcade machines, and therefore make sure that the tax authorities would be able to collect the tax money owes to them. Gamers at the time were happy. No big issues, no big complaints. And why is that? Well, I would argue that gamers were happy because game design was pure and the terms of the deal were straightforward. You insert a coin, you play for a while, and then you decide whether you play more, and then you will have to spend more. With the advent of home consoles and computers, the industry entered the game as a product era. And without getting into the issues or whether from a legal standpoint a game should be regarded as a good or a service, the expression game as a product, I take it to as referring to the fact that games were still embedded in a physical medium. The physical medium can be purchased at retail in exchange for the payment of a one-off sum. And once the consumer has got their hands on the physical product, the publisher loses their control over how the gamer plays the game and pays for it. In addition to IP issues, content and age regulations started to become part of a video game lawyer daily life. Some regulations were self-regulatory nature. Some regulations came from state regulations. And then during the course of the evolution, advertising and marketing law started to become relevant, but I would think that in the vast majority of cases, provided an advertising statement was not misleading, it was factually correct, and it could be substantiated, the position was going to be generally okay. Antitrust and competition law started to become relevant later on, and it took a while, I think, for players in the industry to understand that parallel trade is actually a legitimate practice in Europe. But eventually we got there, even though both Activision and Nintendo felt the law of the Commission and got fined a few millions each for being slow to understand that. During the course of the first decade of the century, things started to change quickly, and a fair amount of complexity was added to the mix. The retail purchase price was no longer the only way through which publishers were monetizing on their IP, and new monetization models started to emerge. Subscription became one of these models, and so certain games required the payment of a normally monthly subscription to be played, and then subscription-based services enabling access to a portfolio of games appeared on the scene. Microtransactions, i.e. transactions involving a smaller amount of money than the sum of money normally required to purchase the game or the main game, enable consumer to buy downloadable content, season passes, in-app purchases started to become relevant, also in relation to loot boxes, which we'll hear about later on. Indirect monetization techniques, particularly in-game advertising, started to become relevant, and all of these started to be combined together in the most creative forms. During this year, in addition to, well, consumer law started to become more and more relevant, as well as data protection laws and antitrust and competition law also became quite relevant, and digital distribution in particular posed some challenges and attracted the attention of competition authorities, in particular in relation to the use of geo-blocking or geofencing technologies. And there is at least one big investigation still going on, which the European Commission is leading. So, on the one hand, digital distribution opened the doors to self-publishing. On the other, the development of the technology led to the proliferation of gaming platforms. And these two factors together led to new players, new entrants entering the market, most of which embraced the free-to-play model, which from a Western world perspective, we could say was imported from Asia. Now, a free-to-play model definitely is a good thing for the industry. I would find it difficult to look at it otherwise, because it increased the level of competition within the market, which benefited consumers in terms of giving them a greater choice in terms of what to play and on what terms, and lowered, at least in theory, the price for accessing game products. On the other hand, however, the free-to-play model started to infuriate consumers and parents alike. And I believe the fundamental reason for this happening was the perceived lack of transparency surrounding the model. The controversy surrounding the free-to-play model led competition authorities across Europe back in 2013 to agree on a common position paper, which didn't introduce any new rules. It was just about interpreting existing provisions, consumer law provisions, in relation to the free play model. And, well, 4 basic things were covered in this position paper. And those 4 things were essentially, don't mislead consumers about the true costs involved in a game, and so consider not calling a game free to play if it's not actually free to play. The game should not contain direct exhortation to children to buy items or persuade their parents to do so. Consumers should be informed about the arrangements related to the purchase and should not be charged through default settings absent their consent. And then the last point is very basic: give the consumers an email address, right? A way to contact you as the publisher in case they have complaints or questions. Fairly basic things, and nonetheless, I remember at the time, everybody freaked out. Ooh, new rules. This is going to be the end of the free-to-play models. We are the game industry. We don't need rules, do we not? Irrespective of whether we need rules or not, a number of regulators across Europe started enforcement proceedings because even though those 4 principles were fairly, I would say, basic and simple, not everybody had embraced them. And so enforcement actions that I know of were brought in the UK, in Germany, and even in Italy back in 2005, involving Gameloft, a French publisher, as well as Amazon, Google, and Apple, which then led to the platforms as well as the publisher to give undertakings to the Italian Consumers and Market Authority. And so in this way, on the one hand, the parties involved in this action got away without getting a fine. On the other, the platforms started to, well, changed effectively their approach and introduced new policies which were compliant with this principle. And then in the course of 2017, two things exploded, which added a fair amount of complexity. The use of cryptocurrencies in-game and inclusion and the use of loot boxes as a way to monetize became widespread. Now, that's led from a legal standpoint, well, that caused from a legal standpoint the result that now video game lawyers have to deal with staff, financial regulations, money laundering, for instance, e-payments, gambling and lotteries regulations that they would have never have to deal with or expected to have to deal with in the same way as currently they have. Now, the interesting thing here is to compare how, for instance, consumers seem to be generally okay with how loot boxes function within Overwatch, and Blizzard actually charges what could be seen as a retail purchase price, or the digital equivalent of it, and on top of that, they're monetizing through the use of loot boxes, but nothing major there. On the other hand, Microsoft with Forza Motorsport and Star Wars with, and EA with Star Wars Battlefront 2 had to deal with infuriated consumers in relation to their choices to use and include loot boxes within the game. And so how can we explain these kind of different reactions from consumers in relation to very much, the same business model? Is this normal? Should we accept that this is a period of experimentation that will inevitably cause some hit and some misses, or should we look at it in a different way? Could we regard the reaction that the consumers had to the choices made from a monetization standpoint by EA and Microsoft, for instance, as a response to a new model, or to the attempt to introduce a new model they didn't like? And that model could be the pay to win model. Now, whatever that the reason for this alignment could be, there is a fact, I think, that the perceived abuse of some of these new monetization models on the part of the consumers led or brought games and games monetization models on the radar of regulators in a number of countries, including Italy, for instance, where video games, where I've always considered that to be the position, would fall under the radar of legislator and regulators. And so, for instance, in Italy, now we are expecting a new regulation towards the end of this month, which will cover content and age ratings, and it is still unclear what the impact will be on the PEGI system, for instance. But the perception, and this is clear in the white paper that was published at the beginning of this year, by the Italian Consumers and Market Authority, that the PEGI system is not necessarily adequate in terms of its ability to deal with minors and consumer protection stuff. So, unfortunately, I believe we need to be prepared to deal with a more complex regulatory framework, but time will tell. So, cultural identity and freedoms. Freedoms of the industry to continue to lead change and innovation. Freedom of the developers to recoup on their investments and hopefully turn a profit. Freedoms of the gamers to make informed decisions about what game they want to play. The freedom of the parents to exercise their parental authority and therefore decide what their children should or should not play. And a freedom of minors to grow and develop in a society that cares for their well-being. If culture means the set of value that one lives by, and identity is living by those value, then the question arises: what are the values of the video game industry today? And of course, it's a big question that I'm not going to try and answer. But one thing I want to stress is I've always felt and thought as a gamer and as a lawyer that social responsibility was and is entrenched in the video game culture. And when I speak to students, Queen students, and I see a few here today, I always go back to this passage in the legal judgment from Justice Scalia in the case Brown versus Entertainment Measures Associations, where Justice Scalia praises the video game industry for being a socially responsible industry. Comparing it in particular and noting how the video game industry outpaces other more established entertainment industries, and in particular the movie and the music industries. And the question arises as to whether or not Justice Scalia would praise the video game industry today for its sense of social responsibility. So, complexity. We have to deal with more complex stuff, and of course, this is. I will be curious to discuss these things with you. How do we deal with complexity? Well, three sets of considerations come to mind. One is the importance of legal review. Experimenting with new technology and business models, only considering the business side and not taking into account properly the legal aspects may backfire. And there have been instances where this has happened, not only in relation to specific players, such as electronic arts, but for the industry as a whole. The importance of striking a balance between a good game design and effective monetization, not to make the consumer feeling extorted, and then self-regulation. Of course, self-regulation can keep state regulation away. But, and this is a question that I think deserves thinking about, is there a representation issue now within trade associations? Can we, are the objectives, the values of all the players, on the one hand, the more established AAA publisher, and on the other hand, the smaller developers aligned, and in what way are those interests being effectively represented by trade associations vis-a-vis, or in the context of the conversation that are taking place and should be taking place between the industry and industry players and legislators and regulators on the other hand. I was about to forget artificial intelligence, which is also part of the of this year's conference. I have little doubt that artificial intelligence could play a big role in making monetization more efficient and whale fishing more effective. However, also in the light of the decision, the very recent decision from the World Health Organization to include a gaming disorder in the list of recognized disorders, I think we should probably pause and think before going down that route. And I'll stop here because I think I'm running out of time.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for a very concise presentation of, well, a lot of legal headaches I keep from your presentation, and I like the contextual ethos of the gaming industry and where the law comes to raises those headaches. But we will focus particularly on one of those issues in relation to cryptocurrencies, which seems to be very challenging from a regulatory perspective. Tamara.
So good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. So Maria, thank you for introduction. I'm Tamara Sokolchik, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the lawyer at Wargaming, and in Wargaming I mainly deal with monetization issues. That's why today I'm going to speak very briefly about cryptocurrencies. I know it's really hard to speak during the second day, and it's really hard to listen during the second day. So please bear with me next 10 or 15 minutes. I will try to be short and precise, and if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt at any point. Now, just to begin with, how many of you are using the messenger which is called Telegram? Okay, a few. It's mostly popular in Russia, though, and the owner of this messenger, Mr. Durov, recently announced that he's going to create a cryptocurrency which is called Gram that will be built into the messenger, and that will provide for payment solutions all over the world. So basically, it will enable the users to pay with the messenger, bypassing credit cards. According to Mr. Durov, the speed of these transactions will be very comparable to Visa and MasterCard transactions. And on top of that, it will cover the user base that the Telegram now has. And nowadays, it counts around 180 million of users. Now, the question is, sorry for that. Now, the question of my presentation is whether the game industry needs to have a look at cryptocurrencies and somehow integrate it into the game. I will cover two topics. Well, I plan to cover two topics. The cryptocurrency to be used as a payment method in the game, and cryptocurrency to be used instead of the game currency in the game. Moving to the first one. I guess everybody knows here what is cryptocurrency, and speaking about it, I genuinely mean only those currencies that are digital, that are based in the blockchain, and then that provide for the secure transactions within the system. Now, as the legal nature of cryptocurrencies, it's really high debatable at the moment what the cryptocurrency is. there are two approaches that are being taken by the legislators all over the world. One of the approaches is that cryptocurrency is effectively the currency. It's money. It actually has all the functions that the regular traditional money have. And that's why the transactions with cryptocurrencies shall be treated the same way as with traditional currencies. The second approach is that cryptocurrency can be regarded as property rights, in which case it will be taxed as capital gains, and we will have a look at that a little bit later. Now on this slide, you can see that the bubble, as many people now call the crypto world, is actually still growing, and the predictions for this year are very high as well. So in 2013, there were just 8 cryptocurrencies on the market. And by the end of 2017, we see that as many as almost 400 new cryptocurrencies have appeared on the market. Also, on the bottom of the slide, you can see that Bitcoin, which used to be the major cryptocurrency in the beginning of this whole story, is not that big anymore, and its market value is actually around 40% at the moment. Now, how the game companies can benefit from all of that, like from having the audience of crypto market. So the first and the basic way how they can do it is actually to use the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever you can imagine, as the payment method in the game. This is relatively easy to do. So there are a few ways how you can do it. You can either integrate a cryptocurrency wallet into your store and receive the cryptocurrency itself to this wallet, and then at any point of time to convert this cryptocurrency into traditional currency. The second way how you can do that is you can have, again, wallet integrated in the store, but instead of receiving the cryptocurrency, you would receive a real money to your bank account. This way, you will mitigate the risk of volatility of this cryptocurrency because you will be selling your in-game items at the exchange rate applicable at the moment, and at the same moment, you will be receiving the same value for this in-game item. Now, what are the benefits of this approach? What are the benefits of allowing users to pay with the cryptocurrencies in your game? So for now, the fees for transactions with cryptocurrencies are relatively small, and here I'm talking about only the transactions within the system, so within the ecosystem of the cryptocurrency. I'm not speaking about cashing out. Yeah. The second advantage is that the principle of working of cryptocurrency is that it doesn't really store any personal data. Unlike the transactions with credit cards, for instance. So whenever you process these transactions, you actually collect and store data that belongs to the users and that is extremely sensitive. And in order to be able to do that, you need to be certified, or you need to use a special service provider that is certified. There is no such thing with cryptocurrency needed, at one hand. On the other hand, the question is how all this information that is actually stored within the blockchain that lies at the bottom of the cryptocurrency coincides with GDPR. So is this a personal data in the sense of GDPR? And if yes, the question is how they will live together. Another advantage of using cryptocurrency as the payment method is that it does not allow user to have a chargeback. Chargeback is a really headache for many game publishers because, as you may know, Visa and MasterCard, they have certain level of chargebacks that they allow to have within a certain period of time. And if the merchant exceeds this level, there are very high fines for that. And in the end of the day, the merchant can even be excluded from the whole Visa or MasterCard ecosystem for breaching the rules. So nothing like that will happen if you offer the users to pay with Bitcoin. Now again, there is a definite, so the more payment options you allow users to pay with, the happier the user is. As a result, the higher the conversion is in your game, so that's quite obvious. Last but not least, cryptocurrency world is growing very rapidly now. And we can see it from the number of average daily transactions Unfortunately, this is information for 2015, I believe, but still you can see here that, yes, indeed, Visa and MasterCard, they still hold the market largely. They have as many as 17 billion transactions per day. But cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, for instance, they don't really fall behind because they have very similar average daily volume as with PayPal, for instance, which is a huge and massive payment service provider. And then again, if you compare the number of crypto wallets that were recently opened within various crypto exchange platforms, you can see that it's rapidly growing, even though in terms of pure numbers, PayPal, for instance, are still much bigger. But if you look at the tendency, you see that they started from 13,000 and now they are about 2.5, 3 million crypto wallets in the world. Now, what are the risks of having cryptocurrency as the payment method in your game? First of all, not all the developers of the crypto wallets are really good technicians, so to say. So they don't usually provide for sufficient security, which means that all the money that you receive, all the cryptocurrency that you receive in your wallet may be lost in one day. And there is no guarantee that it will not happen. Then, the high volatility. As you might know, in 2016, Steam started accepting cryptocurrencies as the payment method in the store. In the end of 2017, they stopped doing that. And they stopped doing that for two main reasons, as they explained to the community. The first one being that cryptocurrency is there is a very high volatility in the price of cryptocurrency. It constantly is growing or dropping, so it's really hard to predict what's going to be the price of it tomorrow. And taking into account that transactions with in-game items are usually, there are lots of them happening every second. It's really hard to imagine that today you're selling your in-game item for $1 and tomorrow it can be like 1 cent or so. The second reason why Steam stopped accepting cryptocurrency as the payment method is because of unpredicted increase of fees. So when the Bitcoin was at its top level, what was like 18,000 USD per 1 Bitcoin, the transaction fees for operations with Bitcoin increased from 20 cents to 20 USD per transaction. That's why Valve said that they want to protect their users. They don't want the users to pay that much, because obviously this cost would be shifted to the user. So that were two main reasons why they stopped doing that. Well, also for games that are based on subscription, cryptocurrency might not be an option because it does not allow you to have recurrent payments in the game. Another disadvantage is that there is a relatively low transaction volume as of today within the whole market. And last but not least, AML issues and regulations all over the world are constantly changing. So if we look at what's happening now, you will see that in many countries of the world, the status of cryptocurrency is still unknown. In Russia, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not illegal, but it's still not 100% legal. So it's better not to pay with your Bitcoin there. In other countries of the world, the legislator actually requires the exchanges and marketplaces to identify the users that are using, for instance, cryptocurrency wallets on these marketplaces. And this is another issue. This is an AML issue. Some of the publishers might also be required to do a KYC check of their users, and how you're going to do that if you have zero information about your user, right? As in case of cryptocurrency. Then again, last but not least, the banks, the relationship with the banks. Whenever you're dealing with the accepting of Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency in your game, you need to disclose this information to your bank. Otherwise, there might be several severe complications. Since, as far as I'm concerned, lots of banks all over the world and like global banks, they tend still not to accept this new currency as the legal or legitimate payment method. That's why even though you don't receive it to your bank account, but just the mere fact that you're allowing your users to pay with it automatically puts you into the higher risk category within the banking system. Now, just a few examples of the merchants that are, of the game merchants that are using cryptocurrencies as the payment method nowadays. Surprisingly, Microsoft is very active in this sphere. They allow you to pay with Bitcoins both in the Xbox Store and Windows Store. And as I said, Steam used to accept cryptocurrency until the end of 2017, but they don't do it anymore. Now, acceptance of cryptocurrencies in the game is not limited with only the payment method. There is a very interesting, in my view, study made in 2012 by European Central Bank, where they analyzed various virtual currencies that are available on the market. And by virtual currencies, they effectively meant everything: in-game currencies, cryptocurrencies, whatever means of payment you can imagine in the online world. And they came to the conclusion that there are 3 schemes of virtual currencies. The first scheme, and this is mostly applicable to free-to-play games, as you understand. So the first scheme is completely closed flow scheme, when the user is not able to buy the virtual currency and is not able to use it anywhere except for the game universe. The second scheme is very typical for most of the free-to-play games. It allows the user to actually buy the virtual currency for real money, but it doesn't allow the user to cash out. And the third scheme, if you look at it, this is a classical scheme for cryptocurrency. So this is the way where this is the scheme where the user is allowed to both buy the currency with real money and then to exchange it back to the real money. Now the question is, why not to use this scheme and to have cryptocurrency as your in-game currency? And this is the question that recently popped up in the minds of numerous people who are dealing with startups. And we see that there are many offers on the market, pretty new ones, that actually allow the users to use this third scheme, which hasn't really been used before. Now, why so? If you look at the picture of the average Bitcoin user, it's a male, it's 90% male. Usually it's either millennial or from Generation X. And doesn't that sound familiar to you? This is a picture of traditional user in most of the free-to-play games. So that's why the markets actually coincide. Now, what are the benefits and what are the pros and cons for the players and for the publishers to actually have the cryptocurrency as the in-game currency? For players, there are numerous advantages. So first of all, this is portability, which means that if the publishers finally agree to have cryptocurrency as the in-game currency, most likely a number of them will do so, or at least one publisher will allow you to transfer this cryptocurrency within various games of this publisher. So that means that if you have bought certain currency in one game, but you're not longer playing this game, or you want to use this currency in any other game, you will be able to do that. Now, sidestepping credit cards is very important also for developing markets. You know that credit cards are very popular in Europe and in the United States, but they're not that popular in the developing markets. So that is another big advantage for the players. Cashing out, as I said, for now, I'm not aware of any game where you can actually cash out. Correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not gambling. Yeah, I'm not speaking about gambling. Cryptocurrency as in-game currency will allow the users to do that. Then anonymity, or to say correctly, pseudonymity, because there is no real anonymity in the cryptocurrency world, since all operations are based on the blockchain and they're actually written into the blockchain, so we can follow all the operations. Disadvantages. The tax and legal framework of use of cryptocurrencies is still unclear, so the users might not be aware of which taxes to pay and how to pay them for the proceeds that they gain from the operations with cryptocurrencies. Then slow transaction processing is still in place. There is no ideal solution on the market, unfortunately, yet. And there should be one, because unless the speed of transactions is higher, this is not going to work from a technical standpoint. And now, last slide, thanks God. So for the publishers, what are the advantages of having cryptocurrency as the in-game currency? again, as I said, the average user of the Bitcoin is somewhat similar to the average user in the game. So offering the cryptocurrency as the in-game currency will probably allow you to have a bigger monthly average user. Then usually in-game currencies, they depreciate with time. And this happens because there is no control over the issuance of these currencies. So basically, the users can earn them, they can buy them, and nobody actually controls or regulates how much in-game currency is within the game. So it naturally depreciates with time. This will not happen with cryptocurrency because it will be somewhat regulated. The issuance of this currency will be regulated. The disadvantages for the publishers, there are many of them, and I will just mention the biggest ones. So, as we said, high fluctuation, volatility. It's impossible to predict what will be the price of the cryptocurrency tomorrow. AML issues that we covered, so the same disadvantages as for payment methods. There is no minimum viable product in the market yet, so we still need to wait for some time for somebody to offer a good technical solution for this kind of acceptance. And last but not least, using the cryptocurrency as the in-game currency somewhat opens the economy within a given game. And is that exactly what the publisher wants? I really don't think so. So thank you very much. If you have any questions.
Very much. We have slightly overrun. I would like to thank both our speakers, and I'm sure you're happy to take questions over any breaks that we'll have from now on. Just 5 minutes, and if you can come back, please, so we can proceed with the next session. Thank you.